Ever get the feeling that one company just seems to be everywhere you look online?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, today we're taking a deep dive into Amazon Web Services.
AWS, right?
Yep, AWS. We're going to figure out how they got to be such a powerhouse.
It really is incredible when you think about it.
Seriously.
I mean, they started as an online bookstore,
Right.
and now they're basically renting out the very foundation of the digital world.
Yeah, we've got a ton of really interesting reports and analysis to dig into.
Absolutely.
And our mission here is to figure out, is their dominance just because they were the first ones to do it?
Right.
Or is there like a deeper strategy at play here?
Some secret sauce.
Exactly. But before we go too far, I think we got to start with the basics from anyone who's not, super tech savvy.
For sure.
What exactly is cloud computing?
Yeah, it's one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot.
Totally.
People kind of nod their heads like they get it, but maybe they don't really.
Yeah, so break it down for us.
Okay, so imagine this. Instead of owning a car, you pay for the miles you drive.
Okay.
Cloud computing is kind of like that, but for computing power.
Okay.
So instead of companies, big or small, going out and buying all this expensive hardware,
Right.
servers, storage, all that stuff, which, by the way, they might not even use all of it.
Yeah, they're just sitting there.
They can rent access to all of that from AWS.
Okay, so essentially AWS is kind of like a landlord for the internet.
You could say that.
Yeah.
They provide the digital real estate that companies need to run their websites, apps, all of that.
Okay, so that makes sense. But how did Amazon, the company that started, selling books online, how did they get into this whole cloud computing game?
It's kind of a funny story, actually.
Okay, I love a good origin story, so tell me.
So back in the early 2000s, Amazon's online retail business, it was exploding.
Makes sense.
And to handle all that growth, they had to build this massive IT infrastructure.
Oh, really?
I mean, we're talking massive amounts of computing power. But then they realized, wait a minute, we've got all this extra capacity just sitting here.
Doing nothing.
Yeah, and instead of just letting it, gather digital dust, they had this brilliant idea.
Let me guess, they started renting it out.
Exactly. 2006, AWS is born.
Wow.
Essentially, they're renting out their excess computing power.
So it's like an Airbnb for data centers.
Uh-huh. It's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And what started as this kind of side hustle, a way to make some extra cash from their existing infrastructure,
Yeah.
it quickly turned into a major profit center.
Really?
By 2016, get this, AWS was making more profit than Amazon's entire retail operation.
No way.
Yeah.
That's a wild turnaround.
It really is. But they didn't stop there.
Of course not. They're Amazon. They never stopped. So what do they do next?
Well, they realized that just renting out servers and storage, was a good start.
Sure.
But they saw a bigger opportunity.
Okay, tell me more.
They decided to become this one-stop shop for anything a company might need to run their business online.
So not just the building, but also like all the furniture and appliances?
Exactly. I mean, they offer a mind-boggling array of services. We're talking over 200 different services.
200? Seriously?
I mean, that's more tools than a Swiss Army knife.
No kidding.
What kind of services are we talking about here? Give me some examples.
Well, you've got your basics, right?
Yeah.
Virtual servers, databases, networking tools.
Okay, the essentials.
But then it gets really interesting.
Oh, so?
They've got tools for video game development.
No way.
Super sophisticated machine learning platforms.
Wow.
Even services for managing satellite data.
Okay, so it's clear they're not just playing around here.
Yeah.
By offering this massive buffet of services, are they basically creating like a lock-in effect?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the key strategies here.
I mean, once a company gets hooked on all these AWS services, it's got to be really hard to switch to a competitor, right?
Exactly. It's like the more services you use, the more embedded you become in the AWS ecosystem.
Yeah. And there's this huge incentive to just stay put.
It's like a comfy digital armchair you just sink into.
You got it. But it's not just the sheer number of services that gives them an edge. They've also made some smart moves with their technology.
Like what? How do they stand out from the other big players like Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure?
One key differentiator is that they actually build their own hardware.
You mean they're not just buying computer chips off the shelf?
Nope. They design their own. Like their Graviton chips, for instance.
Interesting.
This vertical integration gives them a huge advantage in terms of both cost and performance.
It's hard for rivals to match that, huh?
You bet. It's like they're not content with just playing the game.
Right.
They're building the whole playing field. But it's risky, right? What if the whole industry changes direction?
Yeah, or what if someone else comes up with a better chip?
There's always a risk.
Hmm.
But AWS seems to be mitigating it pretty well.
How so?
Well, on one hand, they're constantly pushing the boundaries,
Okay.
always innovating, making their chips even better.
Smart.
But they're also not betting everything on one horse, so to speak.
Makes sense. So what else are they doing?
They're also really good at building relationships.
With who?
Partners, developers, a whole ecosystem of folks who are building stuff specifically for AWS.
So it's like they're building their own high-performance engine, but then also creating a bustling marketplace for spare parts and upgrades.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty brilliant, actually.
It's like that Apple App Store effect.
Precisely. You got it.
There are tons of developers creating software specifically for AWS, making it even stickier for businesses.
Exactly.
So it's not just the tech itself, it's the whole community around it.
Yep. And that encourages companies to invest heavily in training their people on AWS.
Which makes it even harder to leave.
Exactly. You're locked in. But get this. AWS isn't content with just sitting back and relaxing. They're already looking ahead.
To what?
The next big thing, artificial intelligence.
AI.
Yeah, AI. And they're going all in. They're investing heavily in it. I mean, custom chips, partnerships with cutting-edge AI startups like Anthropic.
Anthropic, yeah, I've heard of them. But before we go too deep into the AI stuff, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier.
Sure.
About AWS's global reach.
Yeah.
They've got data centers all over the world.
They really do. It's pretty impressive.
Why is that so important?
Well, there are a few reasons.
Okay, lay it on me.
First, it's all about being closer to your customers.
Makes sense. Less lag time, better performance, all that.
Exactly. But it's bigger than that. It's also about navigating the whole complex world of international data laws.
Ah, right, because different countries have different rules about where data can be stored and how it can be used.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And AWS has to make sure they're following the rules everywhere they operate.
So it's kind of a balancing act.
Big time.
Trying to provide this seamless global service, but also respecting all these different local regulations.
That's right. It's not easy, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But AWS seems to be handling it pretty well.
I guess so, considering how big they are.
And you know what else they're doing?
What's that?
They're thinking about sustainability.
Oh, really?
They're investing a lot in renewable energy.
To power their data centers.
Yep. I mean, it's a big concern, right? The carbon footprint of all these data centers.
It's huge. So that's definitely a smart move on their part.
It is. It shows they're thinking long term. Okay, so are we ready to jump into the AI stuff now?
Let's do it. It's a topic I'm really fascinated by.
Me too. I think AWS is making some really interesting moves in this space.
Like what?
Well, first off, they're investing in specialized hardware, like their Trainium chip, which is designed specifically for AI training.
So they're going beyond just general-purpose servers.
Right.
They're creating these custom-built tools for the heavy lifting of AI.
Exactly. It's like the difference between, renting a basic sedan and a high-performance race car.
Nice analogy.
If you're serious about AI, you need the right tools for the job, and AWS is providing those tools.
That makes sense. But isn't AI still pretty expensive and complex?
It can be.
I feel like it's mostly accessible to, big tech companies with tons of resources.
Well, that's what AWS is trying to change.
How so?
They want to make AI more affordable
Right.
and easier to use. So it's not just for the big guys.
Democratize AI, huh?
You're right.
I like the sound of that. But how are they actually doing that?
One way is through pre-trained AI models.
Okay, break that down for me.
So these are basically AI algorithms that have already been trained on massive amounts of data.
I see. So instead of starting from scratch, companies can use these pre-trained models as a starting point for their own AI applications.
Exactly. It's like, using a cake mix instead of baking from scratch.
Aha, I get it.
It saves a lot of time, effort, and expertise.
That makes sense. So what kinds of pre-trained models does AWS offer?
Well, they have a wide range
Like what?
for things like image recognition, natural language processing, even code generation.
Wow. So you don't need a PhD in computer science to start playing around with AI anymore.
Not anymore. AWS is making it super easy to get started.
I'm impressed. And this is where their partnership with that Anthropic startup comes in, right?
Right. Anthropic is all about developing safe and reliable AI.
Okay.
And they've teamed up with AWS to make their AI models available through the AWS platform.
So AWS is not just building its own AI stuff, but also partnering with leading AI companies to create this whole AI ecosystem.
Exactly. They want to be the go-to place for everything AI, from the hardware to the software to the research.
That's a pretty bold vision, but do you think it's a smart move? What if AI doesn't live up to the hype? Or it takes longer to really take off than people expect?
Well, yeah, there's always a risk. But
Yeah.
I think AWS is making a calculated bet.
Okay, I follow you.
They're betting that AI is going to be a huge deal, and they want to be in the driver's seat when it happens.
The best way to predict the future is to create it.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the positives of AWS, but what about the potential downsides? I mean, one company having this much control over the internet.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are definitely some things to consider.
I mean, it's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is, yeah.
What if something goes wrong?
Right, exactly.
Like, remember that massive AWS outage back in 2021?
Oh, yeah.
It felt like the whole internet was down.
It was a big one for sure.
I couldn't stream anything. A bunch of online stores were down. Even some government websites were affected.
It's pretty crazy when you realize how much we rely on this one company.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like, what happens when the cloud disappears?
Even for a little bit, yeah, it can cause a lot of disruption. And then you got the whole issue of competition.
Right. How can anyone compete with AWS? They're just so massive.
It's tough, yeah.
It's like trying to open a little corner store right next to a giant supermarket.
Yeah, it's a David and Goliath situation, and Goliath has all the advantages.
And on top of all that, there's the whole data privacy issue.
Absolutely, that's a big one.
AWS has so much data.
Tons of it.
I mean, personal information, company secrets, everything.
Right. And what if that data gets hacked?
Or misused.
Exactly. It doesn't even have to be a malicious thing. It could just be an accident.
A mistake, yeah.
And the consequences could be huge.
So what can we do about it? Are we just stuck with AWS?
Well, not necessarily. There are a few things we can do.
Like what?
One option is government regulation.
Oh, interesting. You mean like breaking up AWS?
Potentially. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people think that antitrust laws need to be updated for the cloud computing era.
To make things a little more fair.
Right, to level the playing field a bit. But it's complicated.
I bet.
There's no easy solution. But there are other options too.
Okay, what else?
We could try to encourage more open source alternatives to AWS services.
So companies would have more choices.
Exactly. They wouldn't be so reliant on AWS.
Makes sense. And I guess companies could also just be more careful about how much they rely on AWS.
Yeah, have a backup plan.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. But, beyond all the practical stuff, I think we need to have a bigger conversation about the role of these tech giants in our society.
That's a good point.
We rely on them for so much.
It's true.
But do we really want them to have this much power?
It's something to think about for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so to wrap things up here,
Yeah.
what's the key takeaway about AWS?
What do you think?
I think it's this. They didn't get to be this big just by accident.
They had a plan.
Yeah, a vision. They were relentless, always innovating, always adapting.
They shaped the internet as we know it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But it's a reminder that technology isn't neutral.
Right. It has real-world
This
consequences.
is businesses, governments, individuals, everyone.
We need to be aware of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we need to be involved in shaping the future of technology.
So it benefits everyone, not just a few powerful companies.
Exactly. Well, that's our deep dive into AWS.
I hope everyone learned something today.
Me too.
It's a fascinating topic.
It is.
And one that we'll definitely be revisiting in the future.
For sure. This is just the beginning.
Until next time, keep exploring the world of tech.
And keep asking questions.
It's the only way we'll make sure technology serves us, not the other way around.